Now I have the pleasure of introducing our keynote speaker, Dr. Shamini Diaz. And you have her full bio in your event program, but I'll provide a shortened version. Dr. Diaz focuses on equity-minded, future-focused, and inclusive teachings that foster successful learning and joy in classrooms. Her work includes curriculum and faculty development. She works directly with educators to transform identities and develop intentional equity-minded teaching philosophies and practices across disciplines. She is also the co-editor of the Stream Journal, and she currently directs Preparing Future Faculty program at Claremont Graduate University in California. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Diaz.
Good morning, everyone. You hear me at the back? Okay. I am very glad to be here with you this morning. And Tina, thank you for that very nice introduction. So what I want to share with you this morning are a few different stories of transforming education that I hope will get you into an imagination space, a real space, a purposeful space for the Institute. So let me get started. I want to say this, a little off script too. This is my first, I've done a few of these events. In the last 3 that I did was online. And I can't tell you what it feels like to be in a physical space again. This is my first one in 2 years. And one of the things I want to share with you is this thing that happened to us. I want to acknowledge it. For me, it's tomorrow, actually, 2 years to the day that my institution changed because COVID. And we went online to work, live, teach, learn, everything online. And I'm sure you did. This is about the time when it happened, right? And what a time it's been. Are we tired? Right? But what a time it's been. Did you learn a lot? Yeah, I'm hearing the reactions. You did. We navigated what I called new normals, new ways of living, new ways of teaching. And in my experience, that was a time of incredible energy and innovation. And so I want to acknowledge that, recognize that, and celebrate that a little before I plunge into the other stories I'm bringing this morning. So could all the leaders in the room please stand? Yes, you got it. Everybody, teachers, researchers, positional leaders, deans, everybody, thank you. Give yourselves and each other a huge round of applause. And this story of leadership is the first one I want to bring to you. In the slide, I've included students. They're not here with us today, but they are present with us in the work that we do, right? And this is a collaboration. This institute is a beautiful collaboration with teachers, leaders, administrators, researchers, students. And this is the story. You are leaders of transformation in education, in a world that has changed and in a still changing world. So to get us thinking and imagining these transformations that you do so easily, like you breathe, every single day in your work, I did an ABC of transformation. I haven't finished it, so I invite you to do the rest of the alphabet, but this is what you do. You help people go from being absent to present. You take barriers, you make it accessible. You say, if you can't do it, you transform that to can't do it yet, right? You take people from being disengaged to being engaged, from being exhausted to being energized, from failing to succeeding, from giving up to having hope for the future. And success is not for me. You make that, I have what it takes to succeed, right? I'm curious to know what the rest of the alphabet is. We make a really good book. And I encourage you to think about it today. But leaders of transformation do this. This is what it takes: care, courage, conviction. And you have it because here you are today. The next story I want to tell that's connected to leadership, if you lead transformation, then you have to know your why. What is your why? What gives you the energy of your conviction? What makes you keep on going? What makes you care? Right? So I thought one of the stories I wanted to share with you is my why, my story. And I'll take a few minutes to share it. I call it the fish story. I'd like you to think of your story, and maybe you'll write it and share it through this institute. But here's my fish story. So I was 9, not quite 9 because it was April, and this was in Malaysia where I grew up. And I was playing in the garden, avoiding my homework, as children do, but it was a particularly difficult piece of homework. My art teacher had said, paint a marketplace. So avoiding homework, I was playing in the garden, and I found an old window frame, and I was going around the garden, framing pictures. This was so much more fun than painting my picture. And then there was this mind-blowing moment. I was framing my dog, Bessie, right? And she moved. And so she was half in, half out of the picture. And it was, for a 9-year-old, it was just this brainwave. Oh my goodness, pictures don't have to be inside the frame, right? They can be outside. So I ran around framing everything in the garden, half in, half out. It was so much better, the picture. So I painted my marketplace. This is what I painted. So imagine, if you will, a hand coming in from one side of the paper holding a fish. And in my mind, I was thinking of Pak Dola, who is a fishmonger in my local market. He's a skinny, scrawny man, so the hand was kind of skinny, scrawny. And then on this side was the head and shoulders of a woman. Big beehive hairdo. She had little beady black eyes, and she was kind of pointing at the fish. She had a big gaudy ring on her finger and vermilion lipstick. She was frowning, right? And I was so excited with my picture. I took it to school, I put it down, and I waited for my teacher to come around, which she did. And then I heard, "Lazy girl." And then, this is what she did. A big, fat, red F across my painting. And it was so humiliating. I was crushed. I was ashamed. I thought I had done something terrible and wrong. And I held in my tears until I got home. And, got home in floods of tears and all of that. My dad was really angry. But it was my grandfather who helped me think of what really happened. And he said, she just didn't know how to see. And so in my journal, as a child, I kept this little journal. I wrote this. That was the night I decided I was going to teach. This was my why. I'm going to be a teacher, and I won't be like you. I'm going to see better. But 9 years old, what do you know? You forget about it. Went on to do all kinds of other things. And, at one point I wanted to be in a space program, but there was no such thing in Malaysia. So life went on. But fast forward 20 years later, I did become a teacher, right? I've been teaching for decades. I was putting away all my childhood things, and I found this piece of writing. And I thought, this was another mind-blowing moment, right? Everything I've done, everything I studied in university, from semiotics to communication to education, has been about seeing better. I had written my proposal for my Ph.D. about imagination and teachers seeing their students better. This is my why. And seeing the invisible learners, seeing the excluded learners, seeing from their perspective, this is why you're here today. And data stories have become my very, very good friend, because it helps me do this transformative work that we do when we talk about ethical pedagogy. So the program that I created at Claremont Graduate University, Preparing Future Faculty, is based on evidence-based teaching for future flourishing. And I think of the future a lot with Seeing Better, and I want to introduce this quote from Paulo Freire. This is an amazing book. If you haven't read it yet, Pedagogy of the Heart, I recommend it very highly. And he says, hope is an ontological requirement for human beings. Without a vision of tomorrow seeing something, hope is impossible. And for me, in the positive psychology space, hope, this is a definition of hope based on hope research. Hope is a sum of perceived capabilities to produce roots to desired goals, seeing something and producing a pathway, along with a perceived motivation to use those roots. So if you think about Seeing Better as a theme, how do we see, maybe before our students can see it, to see into the future and to think about what is the pathway to get there? In this research, seeing without a pathway is not really hope. It's just, wishful thinking. But hope is the vision and the pathway together. So keeping to the theme of seeing, I'd like you to do a little guesswork here, or you might know this. What do you see here? Call it out. What do you think it is?
Neural network.
Neural network. Anybody else? It does look like a neural network. This is a map of the internet. This is a planet Earth, and this is what has happened, right? And to give you a little data around this network, think about information. We live in the information era. We even invented a new word, zettabytes. And we are moving a lot of information really fast, all the time, right? 1 zettabyte is 250 billion DVDs. And in 5 years, from 2015 to 2020, we've gone from 4.4 zettabytes to 42. And actually, I think this is a conservative estimate, because when we pivoted to doing everything online, I think we increased the volume of information we put out there. And we are moving this information at supersonic speeds. We are currently up to 2/3 the speed of light. So imagine for yourself what kind of a world this is in which we do our work. More importantly, what kind of a world are we preparing our students for? But here's a few descriptors. We are interconnected, and it's nonlinear, very complex. It is full of diversities, things that have always been there but are now flooding into our consciousness, into our devices, right? We see it all the time, different ways of thinking, different ways of being. Change, because of that speed, is part of life. It's very fast, it's unpredictable. How does this make us feel? We could be overwhelmed because there's constant shifts and change and crises, but it's also a space of innovation, space of change, something new, something better. How do we see it? And the big question for us that speaks to our why is, how are we preparing our students for their emerging future? Right? And this piece of seeing that's very important here for us as educators, how do we address this radical misalignment? There's something I call the legacy education. This is what has been handed down to us. It's been around for a couple of 100 years, but the world has radically shifted. And so that education system was designed for a different type of world. It was a more homogeneous population in schools. It was a very different set of workforce needs. And we were preparing students for much smaller social contexts. Today, if the world is defined by change, unpredictability, connectedness, and diversity, and we need to foster, whether you teach chemistry or English, we need to foster plural minds, empathy, adaptability, and lifelong learning. then we need a responsive, transformative approach. We are working with a diversity of cultures and identities and needs and goals and dreams, right? We are preparing people for a very different and constantly emerging workforce. We are trying to also build, foster people who are going to be globally interconnected with each other, full of empathy. So this kind of seeing better is about seeing more, seeing broadly, seeing differently, seeing creatively. And in my mind, data stories help me to be very, very creative as an educator. So I want to play a game with you just for a few minutes. Not a trick question. I want you to hold up your hands in response to this question. Show fingers, right? Oh, I shouldn't have shown you the answer. What is 2 plus 2? Quick. Yeah, didn't have to think, did you? Okay, now I'm going to give you 30 seconds to answer this next question. At your tables, please talk. Be as creative as you can. What equals 4? Use multiplication, subtraction, division, whatever you like, as many steps as you go. 30 seconds. Okay. Did any table get more than 10 ways to get to 4? Yeah? Okay, more than 15, anyone? Okay, anyone more than 15, call out your number. Limitless. Yeah, this is infinity, right? There are so many ways to get to 4. And what did we just do? 2 plus 2 thinking, what equals 4 thinking? What was that all about, right? What does it have to do with seeing better and using data? So this is my proposal, that legacy education requires, maybe doesn't demand much more of us than 2 plus 2 thinking. We all know what to do, right? We've been doing it for 200 years, last 50 years. It's an entrenched way of thinking. Nothing wrong with that, but it is one way. And what comes with that are many assumptions about students and teaching and learning. Why do they fail? What is the best way to assess students? You've got to do an exam, right? We fall into this, how it's always been done, right? The what equals 4 thinking is why you are here. I think why we are all turning up as educators. It is how many different ways are there to get to success for different types of situations, for different types of students, for different types of subjects. There are new ways of thinking about, say, assessment, one of my favorite things, right? I practice ungrading. It's a whole different way of assessing learning. How do we think about our students? So seeing better, different, broadly, creatively, this is why we use data. They reveal, remember this, the positive psychology and Freire's idea about hope. They reveal the pathways that activate hope for flourishing futures. This is how we do phenomenal work, and our students can do phenomenal learning. So how do you feel about the word data? Is it daunting? Is it delightful? Come on, it's delightful, right? No? All right, we're going to make friends with data. What is data, right? Think about this. Think with me. Why should I care about it? How does data help me prepare students to succeed into the future? I'm going to offer you a perspective on data that I hope will make data truly delightful. So here's one perspective. It's what I've been talking about all morning, I think. Data is sense-making. It is when you use data, you reveal stories. But more than that, the what equals 4 thinking, when you use data, you can create new stories. And I'd like to introduce this quote from one of my favorite people in the world, Chimamanda Adichie. This is from her TED Talk, The Danger of a Single Story, and she was talking about the kind of social narratives that we grow up with and that we use. And I think when you look at what she says here, substitute the word data, because data are stories, and you will see this is true. Stories matter. Many stories matter. Stories have been used to dispossess and to malign. But stories, data, can also be used to empower, to humanize. Data can break the dignity of a people, but data, stories, can also repair that broken dignity. This is so true about data, right? Making friends with data, dancing with data, being delighted by data, that's what we can come to embrace and embody as educators. The other thing I want to share about data is that it must be purposeful, right? So I heard this from another person who's a real data geek, and they said, data, they use this metaphor of a buoy. Data float in the ocean, little bits and bobs of information. Maybe they send out a little light, but there's nothing unless you can do something with it. Data must be purposeful. So my metaphor for it is data a bridge? Because I keep thinking about what Freire said about hope and hope research, right? Do we use data stories to create that pathway into the future for our students and for ourselves? Does it lead to success and justice in the world? So in thinking about making friends with data, I want to introduce one of my, going from how to why, one of my favorite frameworks to think about how teaching and learning and the world of data come together beautifully. How many of you know the design thinking framework? Yeah, I see a few hands, I see a few head nods. Yeah, this is a really powerful framework. This is from the organization IDEO. They really worked on this framework, and it's what's used at the Stanford D School with innovation. And when I think of teachers, I think, well, we innovate every day, right? Data-informed, reflexive inquiry approach. That is what design thinking is about. Now, in the 2+2 kind of thinking, the legacy education, we actually just begin right in the middle with ideate. We jump in there, we write our syllabus. We go to class, we teach how it's always been done. We make all those assumptions, we just ideate and move forward. But in a transformative approach, in the kind of leadership you do, all of you really want to use this whole framework. So this is how it looks to me. The empathize and define phase are the things that, the spaces that we really need to live in a lot. And that's the data landscape with an inquiry perspective. We ask, who are the students? Who's the audience? Who are the stakeholders beyond our students? That's where imagination comes in. Communities, employers, the future. What are the contexts in which we do this work, in which the students learn? Again, the context of the present and the future. What are the limitations, but also what are the opportunities? I think you did, if you all think to what you did in the last 2 years, this huge limitation, can't go to class. But look at the opportunities you found and the innovations you've made in how you teach and how you build communities online and how you cared online, right? How you help students come together and learn. That is the data landscape, empathize, define. Then you ideate, informed by all that. You brainstorm, you think. But that ideation is never finished. That's why they call it prototyping and then testing. Those three go together. You write a syllabus, design your course, do a curriculum map in your department, you take it to class, and then you get feedback, you see how it's working, you observe, you're testing all the time. This is a very formative process, and it might send you going all the way back to empathize and define. So I don't like the way this diagram looks. I really feel it should look like this. Don't you? This cyclical, continuous discovery process. Now, when you start doing this, data becomes delightful because you're really seeing, right? And I took a look at the Faculty Institute outcomes, which are really skills, and it fits right in with this framework. I mean, let's take a look at those 4. Reflect and assess student retention and success from an inquiry perspective. Yep, you are doing the empathize, define, testing cycle. Use evidence-based decision-making at the classroom level. You are doing empathize, define every day, right? And then you're ideating on the fly. You might have planned something, but you are making that adjustment. You're improvising. You should all be good at improv theater. And that's part of my background, and I have found that teachers make the best improv theater people. They really, really do. Develop an action plan in the classroom to support students' retention and success. That's ideating, or always informed by empathize and define, and prototyping. What is the action plan, right? And testing it. And then understanding that developing a culturally responsive learning environment is a continuous process. This is really critical. We're not done with one plan, and we shouldn't be frustrated with our plans being fluid, because that is how it is to truly live your life. Why should we not educate in the same way? You do this all the time. Actually, many of you probably do design thinking. When you think of parenting, is it design thinking? Yeah, what else is design thinking, right? Parenting is a good one. Workplace, even travel sometimes. When you are doing an adventurous travel and not going on a guided tour, when you're just traveling, you're doing this. Empathize, define, ideate, prototype, test, right? Will it work or not? So I want to bring you back to this quote to close. Hope is an ontological requirement for human beings. Without a vision of hope, of tomorrow, without a vision of hope, not a, I don't know what you call that slip, but I think I meant it. Without a vision of tomorrow and of hope, hope is impossible, right? And when you think about, so I've shared my story, my why, seeing better, but I hope we can share a collective story of that emerging future and this collective story of leadership that all of us are engaged in creating pathways to the future. Then what you do, especially in this institute, which is exciting for me to know about, is this collaboration. We cannot do this work on our own. We really cannot. We have to collaborate with each other and find the data stories. What are the narratives, as Chimamanda Adichie says, goes on already? And what are the narratives that you think we can change? Then how do you do that change? For equity, for joy, for success, ultimately for transformation. Learning in itself is transformation, going from I don't know to I know. Right? Education is transformation from being unprepared to being prepared to encounter our future. So this work that you do is the work that we, when I started out, I said takes care, courage, and conviction. So I'm going to leave you with a couple of questions. What is your why? Your mission as an educator, and what are you most looking forward to doing as a result of this journey? And I want to take you back to the very start of when I started talking, and I asked all of you to stand up if you are leaders, right? You are leaders of transformation. You have the heart to care, the courage of your convictions, and I wish you all the best in this journey as you enter this institute. And you know what? I hope it doesn't end in September. I hope that the work you do here and the collaborations you make and the friends you make to collaborate, they become a living community for you, because no educator can do this by themselves, right? So find each other, start today, start making friends, start building community, and take it on into the future and be phenomenal. Thank you very much.
We're going to share this for a bit. We're going to start the Q&A session right now. So John and Robert from our team will be passing around the microphones. Feel free to just raise your hand if you have a question for our speaker. All right. So I'll ask the first question.
Okay.
And you can come up and join me. I'm not sure that mic is working. Yeah.
I prefer to stand.
Yeah, same here. So as a transformative leader, I'm sure you've encountered several challenges throughout your journey to try to transform the institutions that you serve. What were some of the challenges, and what were some difficult individuals or maybe situations that you had to overcome, and how did you overcome them?
Okay. Oh, that's a loaded question, right? My personal journey into education has been full of challenges. I'll start with one way back, and then I'll maybe share one more recent. But as a learner, I'm sure you all have stories, right? One of my challenges was I was a slightly different type of learner. You saw that with my little fish story, right? I like to play. And I got into trouble for that all the time in school. I was that either the invisible child, nobody noticed me, or I was somebody who suddenly had the spotlight on in a very bad way, right? And one of the biggest challenges I had to encounter was, I had decided I was going to teach, and in the process of learning to teach, I was told that someone like me shouldn't be a teacher. And that was a huge challenge. It was a huge blow because, you're young and green and you don't know what you're doing. And it was one teacher who saw me, who really, now that I've recovered that idea of seeing better through that fish story, and it's guided me in the last, say, 20-something years of my life. But this was before, and who saw me and said, you're going to be a very different kind of teacher. You'll always get into trouble, but that's okay. And gave me that opportunity, opened a door for me, and said, okay, if you want to experiment with these creative ways of teaching, come into my class and do it. So I had a chance. And this is one of the things I want to say about the story, that when we feel these challenges, if we are lucky or we know how to reach out, we get a door opened for us. And for me, I'm going to come to my later challenge story, how do we do that for our students? Because many of them are invisible, right? Many of them have, if they're the first in their family to go to college, or they just have different ways of thinking and don't know how to have that voice. They are just invisible. And then they fall through the cracks and they go away. So in the current work, one of the big challenges I've had, so I set up this program at Claremont Graduate University called Preparing Future Faculty. And PFF is not an unknown thing. It's around the country. It was started in 1993 as an attempt to help future educators prepare themselves better. Because in K-12 we have accreditation and training, but in higher ed, apparently a Ph.D. means you can go teach. Not true, right? You may be an expert in chemistry, but have you ever really engaged people? So in setting up this program, some of the biggest challenges I've had were basically the pushback. Legacy education was a challenge. So when we say we need to think about active learning, many faculty, graduate students are not even faculty yet. There's a lot of pushback. No, but that's not how I do it. That's not how I was taught. And those challenges require, and this is where I go back to my data story. I have the evidence of active learning and why it works. We also have one of the best ways I've overcome my personal challenges and my professional challenges is by doing. They come and try it with me, and then they see for themselves. I don't know if I've answered that question fully, but those are the kinds of challenges I face every day. The no, right? Or you should not. Yeah. Other questions? Happy to take any question you like, either about what I said or in general questions. What are you curious about?
Hi, I loved your explanation of data in terms of a story. So often as educators, we look at quantitative data and then we make qualitative statements.
Yes.
How can we do the opposite and take our students' stories and quantify them?
Right. Okay, good one. As a researcher, I started out with narrative inquiry, qualitative data. And unfortunately for us, the world is divided into quant people and qual people, and that is a terrible thing. We live in binaries too much, right? But stories can be quantified. So when you look at your student stories and you do a focus group with students, when you just chat with a student and have them say things, what are the patterns? This is the thing about stories. In another life, I was a storyteller, and stories are full of patterns. So what are the patterns that people are saying? You can count those. You can highlight those. We don't talk about an N in qualitative data research, right? It's not about having a big N. It's about having maximum heterogeneity, maximum stories that are all coalescing around the same pattern. So when you do your work, the stories people tell are some of the most powerful things. And I do a lot of mixed methods research. When you are doing exploratory research, grounded theory, grounded research, action research, it brings you the narrative stories, a lot of them. But you need that in order to write, say, a good survey. Because is a survey really objective? Think about it. There's a human being who wrote those questions. What did they know or not know? So the empathize and define area is both qualitative and quantitative, and the two better play together. Thank you for asking that question. That was a great one. Other questions? Someone over there? I think there's a mic going around, yeah.
I love that you shared that you have a background in improvisational theater. And one of the tenets of improvisational theater is the concept of yes and.
Yes.
I'm just curious how that has informed your methodology, your teaching, your research.
Absolutely. What equals for thinking is another way of thinking of a yes and, right? We think in binaries too much. So as a researcher, you're only doing qualitative research. Don't you need to do a big quantitative study? Yes, and, right? Both. Mixed methods is yes, and. When you do your work, well, this way, lectures are bad. No. Lectures can be wonderful. So you do yes, and what are you doing to engage our students? So it comes into kind of my daily narrative when I work with people, with all the challenges I shared earlier, when people push back. Instead of saying no, you say, okay, yes, and then will you come and try it with me? And that kind of disarms people when you agree with the objector, right? When they say, how dare you say grading is going to, take away focus, motivation, and learning? I'm like, well, yes, I don't see grades as bad, but come and take a look at this stuff here. They're going to walk over and look at the stuff. So yes, and is very powerful. If I had my way in a long ago training, I used improv methods to work with teachers, and we would play with yes and to get away from the no but. One more thing I want to share with this comes from the work of George Lakoff. He studies metaphors in language. In the English language, take the word argument. What are all the metaphorical language words that we use around the word argument? It's incredibly binary. Attack, defend, shoot down my points, right? Defend my side. That's an argument, thrust and parry. And he proposed, what if there was a culture somewhere in the world where the central metaphor for argument was dance? Two people, back and forth, balance, support. That's yes and thinking, right? So yes and should be part of our toolkit. And thank you for asking that question. That's a very, very powerful. I was thinking of bringing a yes and into this presentation, but we weren't going to be here all day, so I didn't. So gave me the opportunity. Thanks. Another question. Do we have time?
Yes, we have time for one more.
Thank you so much. It's been so inspirational and something we've all needed after 2 years. But you referenced Paulo Freire a lot. You mentioned a couple quotes, and I'm a big admirer of Paulo Freire and his work. But you mentioned hope. But what are some other things from your perspective now, after 2 years, that Paulo Freire's work can inform us about? You mentioned hope, but what else can it? And some folks might not be familiar with Paulo Freire, so maybe if you can give a little background on that too.
Yeah. Freire sometimes seems dated, but I almost feel like in the last 2 years, certainly in my teaching, his work and his thought has come back, given the new normal we're in. And I don't want to ever go back to normal. You hear people say, let's get back to more normal. There's so much stuff in the normal that was not good. Right, we want to move ahead to a new normal, and Freire is all about this. One of his most powerful works, I think the one best known, is Pedagogy of the Oppressed. And if you read that, and I think you can get free downloads of it now, chapter 2, he shows, he almost thinks in a binary fashion, but he shows a shift that is needed. So something else from Freire is banking education versus problem-posing education. And banking education is an assumption, and I see that in legacy education systems very much, the notion of transmission. So you're the learner, I'm the teacher, I'm the expert, you're empty vessel, I fill you up, right? You comply, you learn this. And there was maybe a time in the world, I say that, but I don't believe that. I don't think there was ever a time in the world. But some people would think that, yeah, there was a time when, we are preparing people for the workforce. They all need to read, write, do arithmetic, the 3 R's, and we send them on their way. And we're the experts. This is a knowledge acquisition model. And it is knowledge controlled by the person in authority, the teacher. And the problem-posing education is really the transformative education I talked about. So the 2+2 model and the what equals 4 model. Problem-posing education is where you empower students to have voice, to have agency, to know what it is they are envisioning, to have a dream for the future. And that's where Freire went from his Pedagogy of the Oppressed to his other Pedagogy of Hope, where he talked about this deep human need. So one of the birthrights, or one of the things I get from Freire is that every single person, watch young children. Have you ever watched them trying to learn anything? They have no fear, they take risks, they do yes and all the time, they are curious, they're playful, and then they go to school. And I seriously think, because I've worked across the ages, that schooling is different to education. Schooling is a compliance discipline thing. In my experience, preschool children go to school, and in a study I did, within 3 months, the same child is asking permission to have an idea, whereas before they would just have the idea. Right? So those are some of the ideas that Freire brings that I feel we can all look at again. And today, his idea of problem posing, having voice, agency, knowledge creation, not knowledge acquisition. Think about that world I shared with you. You see how important that is if our students are going to be successful. And I think it's important for teachers because we're living in a changing educational environment.
Okay. I have to apologize to cut our Q&A session right now. I want to make sure we have enough time to gather our things to go out to the breakout rooms. But we have some time to stick around in case folks have a couple more follow-up questions. Well, again, join me in thanking Dr. Diaz for her keynote and inspiring us this morning. Thank you.